Is it time to reimagine your future? The right business skills may make a difference in your career. At Capella University, we offer a relevant education that's designed to focus on what you need to know in the business world. We'll teach professional skills to help you pursue your goals, like business management, strategic planning, and effective communication. And you can apply these skills right away. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. Happy Saturday. I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas and is getting ready for the new year. This is our special that we're doing that's going to be kind of an overview of what happened in 2024, a little bit of a look ahead, have some wonderful guests on, so you're going to want to stay with the show for the full 2 hours. We're on, by the way, every Saturday afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m. on WABC. We have great ratings thanks to you, our smart listeners. By the way, I love it when people come up to me and say, hey, Steve, I listen to the More Money Show. So if you see me out on the street or anywhere and you can come up to me and just tell me if you listen to the show or that you like it, that just means the world to me. So thank you. And thank you for the people who come up and say hello. And by the way, if you have ideas of how we can improve the show, I'd love to hear them. We want 2025 to be better than ever. So we're going to have a lot of fun this afternoon and getting ready for New Year's and the new year. And so I wanted to start with some just broad ideas about where I think we are in America. And I'm going to start with a very positive message. We'll talk about this in depth later in the show because I have some great economists coming on and business leaders. But one of the things that I think is extraordinary, and we've been talking about this in our Unleash Prosperity hotline, and if you do not get the Unleash Prosperity hotline, please, please, please sign up. It's free. It costs you nothing. It is free, absolutely free. There's no advertising. It's just pure information. We provide a lot of information about what's going on with the economy, a lot of information what's going on with politics, a little bit of finance, a little bit of humor. I like to use humor, and we use humor on this show quite a bit. So just sign up. Just go to unleashprosperity.com. That's unleashprosperity.com and sign up for the hotline. And if you like it, we'll keep sending it to you 5 mornings a week. And by the way, it's very short. People love it because you can read it in 5 minutes. After you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page, read the hotline. And so one of the items we had in the hotline the other day was an amazing statistic that is just extraordinary to me. If you want to feel good about America, if you want to bleed red, white, and blue, here's an amazing story. If you look at all of the capital, the market capitalization value of every company in the world, and you look at how much of that capital, market capital, is domiciled, companies domiciled in the United States of America. It turns out that today in America, because of the incredible growth of our corporate titans like Google and Apple and Amazon, and I could go on, Walmart, we now 60% of all the equity is in American companies. That is more than we're 60% and the whole rest of the world is 40%, which is extraordinary because we're maybe 6% of the world population, but we have 60% of the wealth. This is magic. I mean, there's something great about America that we were able to achieve that. Now, look, it's been a tough year for many Americans. We had inflation. We had declining incomes over the last 4 years, real problems for middle-class America, no question about it. But it is amazing how well we do as a country in terms of competing. And Trump said it very well when he met with the Japanese CEO, who this was a week or so ago, and he recited these statistics because the Japanese company was going to invest $100 billion into the United States, and Trump said it's going to get better. He said, it's going to get better because we're going to reduce taxes. We're going to reduce regulations. Those are the costs of doing business in the United States. We're going to make it less expensive to do business in America, just like people in Florida have made it less expensive to do business in Florida than people, unfortunately, in New York, where it's very expensive to do business. And he said that will lead to a lot of businesses and factories and capital moving to the United States. And he is absolutely right about that. So 60% of all the wealth is in the United States. And I'm going to pull this chart up. Obviously, you can't see it because it's a radio, but I look at these numbers. They're actually, I lowballed it. It's actually closer to 64% of all the equity of all the companies in the world are located here in the United States. And think about, I wonder if you can guess which company is second. Think about that for a minute. Which company do you think is second behind the United States in the terms of the percentage of market capitalization of their companies? And ding, 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 the answer is Japan. But here's the amazing thing. The United States is 65%. Number two is Japan. Their percentage of all the equity is 6%. Think about that. Second place is 1/10 as large as the United States in terms of our equity. And then third, I wonder if you can guess that, it's Britain. Fourth is China. China is at 3%. So we have 20 times more equity than does China. That's spectacular. Canada's next, India, Taiwan, France, Switzerland, Germany. So we're hitting out of the park. Now, I saw a statistic the other day, and I cannot confirm this. So it was a fairly reliable source, but you never know if these things are true or not. But I did read it, I think it was in Bloomberg, that just our Magnificent Seven, you all have heard of the Magnificent Seven companies. These are, I don't think I can remember all of them. Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, NVIDIA. I forget what the other two are. They don't come immediately to mind. But those seven companies have more market capitalization value than all the other companies outside the United States combined. So we're knocking it out of the park. And we do that because we have brain power, we have innovation, we have freedom, we have free markets. Now we said, we could do a lot better. I mean, I spend all my time on this show talking about all the crazy regulations and the high taxes that could be lower to make us more efficient. But we still have a very pro-business, pro-entrepreneurship culture in America. And Americans voted for more of that when they voted for Donald Trump. And so I just find it incredibly uplifting that we are doing so well in these international markets. Now, another thing I wanted to say, and I just want to get this off my chest. There is a lot of good news coming. Now, I know there was a big market sell-off after the Fed made its decision to cut rates by 25 basis points. And then they said, we don't think we can cut rates anymore. And there was a big sell-off and the market lost a lot of money. But I'm here to tell you, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I guarantee you that we are going to have a very strong economy in 2025. I can't tell you it's going to happen right away because Joe Biden did dig us into a steep, deep hole. There's no question about it. But Trump is going to hit the ground on day one. And I've said this many times on the show. It's going to be like Secretariat out of the gate, racing ahead of the pack with deregulation, pro-America energy policy, lowering tax rates. All of these things will lead to even more capital flow in the United States. And the way I put this is we are the world. We are. The United States is the world. Everybody else is a little spoke off the United States. And the guy who gets this, by the way, and this is an important economic and business lesson for you all. The guy who gets this is Donald J. Trump. He understands that every country in the world has to trade with America. They have to. China has to trade with us. India has to trade with us. Canada has to trade with us. Mexico has to trade with us. Now, we benefit from trade with them. I'm a free trade guy. I believe when two countries voluntarily trade with each other, it's a good thing for both countries, or else they wouldn't trade. That's the wonderful thing about free enterprise and free transactions is that if two people agree on something, by definition, they are better off because of that deal. But what I'm saying is Trump is using this market power that the United States has to leverage this. And if you want to read a great book, read Donald Trump's great book, The Art of the Deal. Whoever has the most leverage at the bargaining table usually walks away in better shape. And so Trump uses American leverage because of that power we have as the most, by far the most economy in the world, to get these other countries to do. And his requests for these other countries are not unreasonable. He says to China, stop stealing our technology, stop using predatory trade practices, stop, keeping our goods out of your country when we let our goods into your country, and so on. And so he's got very reasonable demands. And the New York Times and the Economist magazine and the talking heads are, oh my God, he's going to cause a global trade war. No, he's not. He's just saying play by the rules. Do the things that are America's interests. And he is using this leverage of American power to get better results. And we will. I think, I'm going to make a prediction to you all, by the way. I think Trump, because he's such a great negotiator, I'm going to predict to you within 6 to 9 months, Trump is going to have the problem in Ukraine and Russia. He's going to end that war. I just feel it. I may be wrong. And if I'm wrong, 6 to 9 months from now, I will agree. I will fess up and admit that I was wrong. But I think I'm right about this. I think Trump's going to say to the Russians, if you don't stop bombing Ukraine, we're going to pump so much oil, we're going to put your because it's just a big gas station. That all Russia's only economy is basically is gas and oil. So if we produce more of it, it just puts them in the poorhouse. And he's going to say, we're going to produce so much oil and gas, you're not going to have any money left. And we're going to send you to the poorhouse. And then he's going to say to Ukraine, if you don't come to the negotiating table and agree to a settlement and stop this killing, we're not going to give you these billions and billions and billions, tens of billions, $100 billion of aid to finance your, military. And when both of these countries figure it out, hey, we cannot cross the United States here, we cannot cross Donald Trump, they will come to the negotiating table. The killing will end. They'll probably draw a line, and I don't know where that's going to be. This is Russia. This is Ukraine. It'll end the hostilities. And this should have happened 4 years ago, but we've got a feckless president right now. So we got a really, really fun show today. We're just going to really talk about what to expect in 2025. A great list of wonderful, wonderful guests on the show. And so we will be right back. This is WABC Talk Radio. This is the More Money Show, and back in 60 seconds.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is our New Year's Eve special. We'll all be ringing in the New Year's in a couple of days. And so we wanted to review what happened in 2024, which we just have a few days left of. So I wanted to ask one of the top demographers in the country, and that is Wendell Cox. Wendell is someone who works with me at Unleashed Prosperity. He's been working in this field for, decades, as long as I've known him. And he knows what's going on with where people are living, why they're living there. He's a transportation expert. Wendell, thanks so much for joining this afternoon. I hope you had a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be with you.
So, Wendell, let's get right down to it. About a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, the Census Bureau came out with its estimates of what happened with population changes in 2024. And as I read your report that you put in our Unleashed Prosperity hotline, you highlighted two significant developments. And let's start with the first one. A big increase in the number of foreign-born who came into the country in 2024. And what do you make of that?
Well, it's too bad that the Census Bureau was not getting it right until now. Apparently, there are other federal agencies, and I don't remember which ones they were, that were tracking this. The Census Bureau had not been including what are called humanitarian immigrants. These are people, that are looking for asylum and where their governments are after them. So people are trying to get away from that kind of thing. Those numbers have not been included. And in fact, the Census Bureau admits that something like 5.8 million additional migrants were in the humanitarian category. So what we've had is a huge increase in overall international migration. In fact, this would make 2024, the present year. I'm sorry. Yeah, that would be the year ended June 30th, the largest international migration year in U.S. history. So that is very significant.
Okay. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying, because obviously there was a big influx of foreign-born. Now, there are different categories of immigrants who come into the country. Obviously, we have legal immigrants who have visas, and I think that's certainly most of the immigrants who come in each year. But then, so that was probably well over 1 million than last year, right? Or I mean, this past year over the last 12 months. But then you have, now when you say, the humanitarian immigrants, are you talking about asylum seekers?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Census Bureau is basically saying this is a recent development, but they didn't really get into it much. But I mean, that is over, just about a 5-year period, an additional 5.8 million.
Wow.
And so the additional the migrant gain this year, that is through June 30th, was about 2.7 or 2.8 million people,
wow,
which is very, very significant. That's
very significant.
Population
now,
of Chicago.
Are these asylum seekers, are they in the country legally or illegally?
Well, they would be in the country legally because they couldn't. I mean, I presume that. I don't know immigration law, but I don't imagine that you would be classified by the government as an asylum seeker unless you were already determined to be one or were in the process of trying to be determined. But I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that legally.
Well, I don't know either. I think, Wendell, though, it may be that's, a significant number of them, and I'm just hypothesizing here, that have basically come into the country without any kind of visa or approval of the U.S. government, and then they basically declare themselves an asylum seeker. So I don't exactly know how that works either. But the point is, some of them probably are here illegally. And I was just wondering about that because so what about people who came in illegally that are not asylum seekers? Are they counted in this,
yes,
census estimate?
The Census Bureau has various means of estimating that. So they basically say that they count the people that get in legally and the people that don't get in legally, and they had never dealt with this humanitarian issue before.
Okay. And so, but most of these people who are coming in each year are legal immigrants. They're lawful immigrants. Is that right?
It's hard to see. That I haven't seen any good figures. I mean, Goldman Sachs is estimating that 60% are not legal. On the other hand, I don't know if their numbers include the humanitarian. So, I mean, this raised incredible questions all of a sudden for me yesterday when I saw the data for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a big issue, especially for our audience in the New York area, because there's so many of these illegal migrants and asylum seekers are located in New York City, and it's been a big problem, frankly, for New York with the especially with the illegals who are being housed in hotels and things like that.
Yes, indeed, that is a big problem.
So let's talk about. On the other hand, we have a lot of legal immigrants who are coming into this country, and one of the things that we said in our hotline this past week is that without the immigrant foreign-born population entering the country, we didn't really have much population growth.
No, it's up a little bit, but not that much. I mean,
okay.
The total migrant level of as a share of the population increase, believe it or not, was about 80%. And by the way, this is a number that is typical in Australia and Canada, where they've got similar kinds of things going on. Those three nations are the most popular nations for people to immigrate to.
Yes. So, our position has been that legal immigration is good for the America, and that but we have to keep out the illegal immigrants because you can't have 10 million people in the country or more. We don't know the number that are not lawful citizens.
Yeah, and one of the great advantages, obviously, about legal immigration is you can basically vet people before they come.
Exactly.
You don't want to be. You don't want to be taking in people who are, convicted criminals, for example. They'd never make the cuts.
That's a big problem. Absolutely. Yeah. Just tell people in New York about that. Now, let me ask you another question, if I may, and that is the other big story, of course, is something that we've covered and you've covered over many years, which is the large migration of people living in the United States, moving from one state to another. And Wendell, where are they going?
They are going to the South. It is unbelievable. And in fact, in terms of what we call net domestic migration, which is people moving across a state line within the United States, there are four big regions in the United States. There's the Northeast, which includes New England. There's the South, there's the Midwest, and there's the West. The only one of those regions that increased in domestic migration was the South, and this has been typical. Everybody's moving to the South, and if you look at the top 10s in terms of net domestic migration, in terms of the states, 7 of the 10 are in the South, and the only ones that aren't in the South are Arizona, Idaho, and Nevada. And by the way, immigration in those places is down. The immigration to the South is going up.
So what do you make of that? I mean, I'll tell you what I make of it, and I'd like your reaction to this. But, the southern states are pro-business. They tend to be right-to-work states. They also you look at the states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee, which had big in-migration. Those states, as you know, Wendell, have no income tax versus the states that are losing population like New York and California, which just happen to have the highest income tax.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I attribute it to all of those things, plus one other huge thing, and that's the cost of living. And the cost of living is largely determined by differences in housing costs. If I buy a car here in St. Louis and you buy the same car in Maryland, we're probably going to pay something like the same amount of money. On the other hand, if I look at the cost of housing, say in the Washington, D.C. level versus where I live, it's huge. So those are the things. And by the way, take Oregon and Washington, which have been huge magnets for domestic migration over the last 2 decades. They've now dropped out of the top 10. Oregon is losing domestic migrants. And at the same time, Washington, you have Seattle. The state of Washington has now imposed a capital gains tax, so you don't give them credit for a complete income tax.
That's a good point.
And the city of Seattle is now, Governor Inslee of Washington is proposing a wealth tax. Well, that's not going to get a whole lot to Washington.
Well, people with wealth will just go somewhere where they don't have to pay the wealth tax, right? And that happens all the time.
As Jeff Bezos already has.
And he has saved millions and millions. I heard he might have saved $1 billion. Now, I cannot confirm that number by moving out of where was he, in California or?
Oh, no. He was in Seattle.
Oh, but he didn't want to pay all the new taxes. And they also have an estate tax there, too, that he won't have to pay now in Florida. And by the way, I mean, it's not only a big amount of money for Jeff Bezos, but it's also a big amount of money for the state of Washington. The reasons Governor Inslee is asking for a wealth tax is to balance their out of control budget. Yeah. And if Jeff Bezos had stayed, they might not need the wealth tax. Now, was there anything in this new report anything else you'd like to comment on? Because this comes out once a year. Everyone knows that the census does the decennial census that comes out every 10 years. This is a sample of a smaller sample, obviously, but it gives us good information about what's happening in America.
Well, yes, and you've got, for example, one of the things that continues to impress me is the performance of the state of Alabama, which has not always been ranked number one in anything in this country. Alabama ranked 7th in terms of the net domestic migration and has rated that well within the last 5 years. What's going on is parts of the South that are less expensive are getting migration from the rest of the country. Now, for the first year, Alabama has actually imported more people from the rest of the country than Georgia. Georgia has been hugely has had a huge population increase. Atlanta is growing very fast. And Tennessee is doing very well at this point, ranked 5th. Florida has dropped a bit, but there's a sifting going on within the South as well.
Yeah, well, let me, just for the benefit of our listeners, I'll give people your top 10. 85,000 moved net into Texas. They were number 1. North Carolina was number 2 at 82,000 people moving in over the amount of people moving out. South Carolina at 68,000. Florida at 64,000. They fell a bit. I think that might be the hurricane effect. And then you have Tennessee. And you have Arizona, and there it is, Alabama, which used to be one of the poorest states in the country. And you're right, they moved ahead of Georgia. Yeah, and then Nevada and Idaho. Amazing stuff, Wendell. That's Wendell Cox, who's one of the top demographers in the country. He works with me at the Unleash Prosperity and is really one of the world's experts. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Happy New Year to you, Wendell Cox.
Happy New Year, and thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back, folks. This is the More Money Show special, a pre-New Year's Eve special on what's happening in America and reviewing the past year. We'll be right back.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas. I want to next turn to one of the world's leading authorities on monetary policy, a good personal friend, but just an expert on finance and how money works. And on the Federal Reserve, she is my nominee to be the next Federal Reserve Board chairman when we finally get rid of Jerome Powell. I'm talking about the great Judy Shelton. She is a senior fellow at the Independent Institute. Judy, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas, and thanks so much for coming on.
Sure did, and what a great pleasure to talk with you, Steve. Thanks so much.
So a lot to talk about, Judy, in the area of the Federal Reserve Board. Let's talk about what the Fed has done in this past year, because I'm not too happy about it, frankly, and I think that a lot of people are confused about the rate cuts, why they did it, when they did it, and how would you assess what has happened with our monetary policy over the last year? I'm a little bit worried about whether prices may be rising again a little bit, but how do you see it?
Well, I think the problem is the Fed just can't get its story straight.
That's right.
It has dueling frameworks, and its old favorite is the idea that the best way to fight inflation is to ratchet up interest rates and effectively punish small and medium-sized businesses, because the Fed says if we can curtail economic activity, that will reduce demand and that'll bring down inflation. The problem is whose economic activity is being curtailed, not the federal government's. The federal
That's for
government,
sure.
they're just a busy little bee, and they're out there with fiscal transfers and subsidies and all kinds of unnecessary expenditures, and they're the ones fanning the flames of inflation. So the Fed comes in as Nurse Ratched and says to punish the inflation, let's take it out on those who don't deserve it, the real producers in the economy, the ones who are the manufacturers, the small and medium businesses who hire people and create the goods and services that would increase supply, which would be the best way to bring down inflation. No, let's punish them and allow government to keep going on. The government is immune from the cost of capital. They don't care what it costs. So this has been the Fed's story right up until September. And then suddenly everything changed. And now they introduced a change of procedure. Here they've been sitting for 8 meetings on this pause at their highest rate in years. And then they go with the jumbo cut in interest rates because now it's not just labor markets, because it turned out that was just a panicky move. There really was no problem with the labor market, at least at the levels that the Fed looks at. but they decided that they were going to recalibrate. And I'll tell you, I understand we see the rise of inflation a little bit. The Wall Street Journal had a powerful editorial saying, why are they cutting it all? Mm-hmm. But I welcome this cut. I will take it on behalf of those small and medium-sized companies that have been frozen out and unable to reach their full potential, because for them, high borrowing costs are a real obstacle. So I will take it. But what I don't like is the Fed now has never been concerned about the fiscal situation, but now Chair Powell is talking about the need to model the impact of policies under the incoming Trump administration.
That's terrible. This really, really, I find troubling, because for one thing, a lot of the models that they're using are saying that Trump's policies will hurt the economy and cause inflation, which seems to me, Judy, I'm talking to Judy Shelton, by the way, her latest book, she's written many, is the latest one As Good as Gold?
It is.
That's
that came out in September. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. So it's fantastic. And I'll tell you a kind of cute little story that Judy and I have been vying for who's number one on Amazon Business and Economics, because I have a book out called The Trump Economic Miracle, and it came out just about the same time. And, 1 week she's at the top, the next week we're on the top, and we kept jiggling back and forth. So I guess, Judy, people have to buy both books, As Good as Gold.
Well, Amazon is recommending that now. It shows a picture of your cover and my cover, and it says often bought together. Well, I'm very complimented by that.
Yeah, and I'm honored by that too. So I'm talking to Judy Shelton. She's a financial expert and an expert on the Fed. Now, the problem, I think, partly is Jerome Powell, because he is not really an economist. I don't think he's more of a lawyer than an economist. I don't think he really completely understands how the economy works, quite frankly. And I am concerned that he thinks tax cuts, Judy, will cause inflation. And I've never seen that. I mean, when Reagan cut taxes, the inflation rate went down. When Trump cut taxes, the inflation rate went down. Where do they come up with these ideas?
Well, first, let's say the economists on staff at the Federal Reserve are registered Democrats, 10 to 1 compared to Republicans.
Hold on, Judy. Time out. I want to say that statistic again, because it is so important. And you're quite right to call them out on this. We had something in the hotline about this. 10 to 1 ratio of the folks who are working at the Fed, who are supposed to be politically independent, right, Judy? And they are Democrats. That doesn't sound like a lot of diversity to me.
No, I'd say that's pretty one note with regard to political philosophy, and it's one that favors government management of the economy. And you're right. I mean, tax cuts. The one thing that Chair Powell has never paid attention to is the fiscal situation. He always before said he takes it as given. And now he actually, in that last press conference, said that, well, we're thinking ahead about the potential impact of these policies. And that I found that the most ominous comment that was made during the Fed's press conference, because the irony is when the Fed increased rates 4 times in 2018 under Powell, when President Trump was achieving record low unemployment rates, excellent growth, increased productivity, and just a terrific economy. And admittedly, President Trump was starting to jawbone the Fed and saying, what are you doing? Why are you raising rates when you haven't even hit your 2% inflation target?
So I find it, they don't have a very good record at hitting that rate. It's like, a blind man throwing darts at a dartboard. But I wanted to add another thing, that they seem to think that, cutting taxes will create more demand, but they don't seem to understand that if you cut tax rates on businesses, their incentive to hire more people and to expand their operations and increase the supply of goods and services. When that happens, as Arthur Laffer says, if the economy produces more apples, the price of apples goes down. I don't think that's a very simple principle. But I don't think Jerome Powell and these 400 PhD economists understand that.
It's absolutely amazing because we know from experience and from the logic you just went through, it's free market logic, that economic growth and low unemployment are not inflationary. That's how you increase supply. That's what causes, relative to demand, prices to come down. What's amazing to me is Chair Powell has actually stated publicly that the Federal Reserve cannot do very much on supply. So they use these powerful tools to hit demand. And what they're also missing, I think, is that a lot of corporate borrowers are still able to stay in business. They pay those high rates. And then guess what happens? That becomes a cost of business for them that goes to the bottom line. And that becomes part of the retail cost that consumers have to pay. So that's contributing to the higher prices, and the high interest income that people are receiving is also making those people wealthier with more money to burn. And so he neglects to see the inflationary aspects of having high interest rates. But for me, the worst part of it, I mean, I want interest rates to be real. I want them to reflect supply and demand. And I have said for 2 years, the 4.25 to 4.5 is not a bad place to be if you're going to have a 2% inflation target. That gives you a real rate of return, traditionally around 2+%. You need that. Zero rates are no good. So you need that. But now for the Fed to sort of say, we're now keeping a close eye, and we're going to be watching to see what the Trump administration does, is it's like they're loaded for bear so they can come in and undermine it. And what I hope is that the supply side program, and I fully expect this, will be so successful in increasing productivity and output and contribute to supply that the Fed can just become irrelevant. Let them just stand aside, be less political, less prominent, and less powerful.
So a couple of last questions, Judy. I'm talking to Judy Shelton, who's one of the top monetary economists in the country. Her book is called As Good as Gold. I get a lot of calls from our listeners over the last year or two, Judy, about something called modern monetary policy. And I try to explain it, why it's wrong to my listeners, and I think some of them get it, but I'd love it if you could explain what modern monetary theory is and why it's so wrong.
Well, yes, modern monetary theory is the brainchild of Stephanie Kelton, and the interpretation is that deficits don't matter. So unfortunately, it has held great appeal for the people on Capitol Hill and in the Biden White House, because if deficits don't matter, then they can just keep deficit spending forever. Right. And now what we're seeing, our salvation...
Wait, time out. So they're saying we can just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and it's not going to have a negative effect?
They're saying we can keep borrowing, and it's not going to have a negative effect.
Jeez.
And then if inflation arises, which they see as just a remote possibility, but if it happens, then their solution is increased taxes.
Oh, my God. So tell me why it's wrong.
Well, I think it's wrong because it sets up government not just to be in control, but abusively so.
Right.
And they're saying really that only the United States can do it because the United States prints the money that effectively everyone has to acknowledge as the real money.
Right.
And so there's no need to deny ourselves all the gifts of fiscal transfers because we can just keep pushing it out. I think what we're coming to realize is there is such a thing as fiscal unsustainability. And we see it creeping into the long-term bond yields. Yes. We see it as just sort of a hopelessness. And if we're going to re-empower the private sector, we just have to cut the size of government. So there's a dual benefit. It's not just a financial accounting benefit to cutting the size of spending. Yeah. It also has to do with the relative apportioning of power in our economy. We need to reduce the government's power and instead give a renaissance to the private sector and entrepreneurship.
Right. Well, Yeah. Well, if anything good comes out of the Biden administration, I hope it is that modern monetary theory is a complete lie, and it is a path to the poorhouse. And shame on Joe Biden. It's almost like he wanted an excuse to spend money, and he found these modern monetary policies who said, go ahead and spend as much as you want. Go ahead and borrow as much as you want. And folks, we borrowed $7 trillion, and that didn't work out so well. Last question, Judy, we've just got about a minute and a half left, is you have endorsed an idea that I think is so interesting, and I've been talking a lot about it to my economics friends, and everybody says, that's brilliant. And this is the idea you've been floating about a gold-backed bond, a gold-backed federal bond. And I like that idea, and explain to our listeners in our last 80 seconds how that would work.
I'd really love to see President Trump initiate this one specific idea. We have 261 million ounces of gold worth about $700 billion that we are carrying on our books as worth only $11 billion because it's priced at the rate when we ended the Bretton Woods system. So it's priced at a rate of $42 per ounce of gold, not $2,700. And I think we could capture a windfall profit by using that gold as specific collateral for a 50-year bond that could be redeemed in either gold or dollars, either the face amount of the bond at maturity or a pre-promised amount of gold for bond holders. And I would like the Trump administration to launch this. I've called them Treasury Trust bonds. Let's call them Trump Treasury bonds and launch them on July 4th, 2026 to mature on July 4th, 2076 to show the U.S. is still standing and to serve as a marker that we're making the dollar literally as good as gold. So as we cut spending and go to sound finances, let's also reform the Fed and go for sound money.
Boy, is that a great, great, great thought for the year 2025. Judy Shelton, you're a national treasure. Appreciate you coming on. And folks, we will be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the second hour of the More Money Show on WABC, the number one talk radio station in these United States. So honored, by the way, that I get to follow Larry Kudlow, who's my hero, who's the best man at my wedding, one of my best friends, and just an economic superstar. So I joke with Larry that he's my warm-up act, but my God, what a superstar Larry is. So how cool is this at WABC? 5 hours. 5 hours of economics and business and fun. And that's what we try to make that show and mine as well. So I hope you're enjoying the show. We've had some wonderful guests on already. I want to open up this hour by talking about what happened with the budget crisis in Washington at the end of the year. And this is just so outrageous. And it shows what terrible leadership we have in Washington right now at this very moment. It's hard to believe, but Joe Biden is still president. He will still be president for the next, 2 or 3 weeks. And he's just completely absent. He is absent without leadership. And this budget crisis has been bubbling up now for 4 years. And I'm sorry, when he goes out there and gives these speeches whenever we see him, because, what's the old saying about Joe Biden, that he is gone, but not, that he's forgotten, but not gone. He's still in the White House, although Donald Trump really is sort of taken over the country, right? Thank God he has. He's intervened already in many important ways to make American economy stronger. But Joe Biden is giving his speech and saying, I'm handing off Donald Trump, one of the great economies ever. And, what the hell is he talking about? What planet is he on? Pluto? I mean, really, how insensitive that is and out of touch with real Americans. Say, oh, I did so many wonderful things for the country. No, you didn't, Joe. It goes back to what I've called the 3 Ds. And those 3 Ds are debt, rose to almost $36 trillion, a $7 trillion increase in 4 years, which is a horrendous record. So it's debt, it's deficits, $2 trillion of deficit spending in the last 12 months, $2 trillion. Outrageous. And the third is declining incomes. People's their affordability of everything from houses to gasoline to groceries went down. They could afford less. They were poorer today than they were 4 years ago. So how in the hell does this guy say this is a great economy that he's handing off to Donald Trump? Now, look, I'm optimistic. I am. And the economy certainly is better this year than it was last year. But to say somehow that this was an economic success is actually insulting to the American people. And there are many areas where he screwed up, but I think one of the worst is with respect to our budget. He let it grow and grow and grow and grow because he got involved in something called modern monetary theory, which basically said we're going to borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow and spend and spend and spend and spend. And don't worry, everything's going to turn out just fine. Well, Joe, it didn't turn out just fine because our prices went up by 25%, for the consumer goods that people have to buy. And that was a real hardship for Americans. So one of the lessons of Joe Biden's 4 years in office, which thankfully will end in 2 or 3 weeks, is that he has taught us that this idea of modern monetary theory, that the government can just rack up these enormous bills, not pay its bills, use the federal credit card, the biggest credit card in the world. It's now the balance on that credit card is $35 trillion. That's 35 followed by 12 zeros. We've got some real work to do. He is not handing off to Donald Trump a healthy economy, but the fireman has arrived. He's here. He's ready to go. He's going to put out the fire, but it's going to take some time and it's going to be a bumpy road. We saw that with what happened after the Fed, cut interest rates, but said they're not going to do it anymore. And the market fell by 1,000 points. It's going to be a rocky road. It took Ronald Reagan 18 months. When he came into office in January of 1981, it took him 18 months to get the economy going. So it can take a long time when you dig yourself in a big ditch to dig yourself out of that ditch. And Reagan did it, but it took 18 months. Remember, after the first 18 months of the Reagan presidency, the economy boomed for the next, it was called one of the great 7-year expansions. I think we can do that again. I have full confidence in the American people, American workers, American businesses. We are so It's like all we have to do is light the fuse, and this thing is going to explode with growth. But it can take a little while. Be patient, folks. But also strap in, put on your seatbelt, because we could explode right out of the gate. Who knows? But I guarantee you, I just saw President Trump a few weeks ago, and he told me he is so ready to go. He is chomping at the bit to turn things around, and it will happen. It will happen. And if it doesn't happen, I'm going to give up the show because I'll admit that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I feel so confident about this. I know you do too. All the polls are showing us that Americans are confident. We are ready to go. We are optimistic about the future. If you're not, you're just a dyed-in-the-wool liberal. And look, I know a lot of people listen to the show are Democrats. That's one of the things I appreciate about my audience. We have a lot of Democrats who call in, and I so appreciate that you listen sometimes to people with different views. But you got to admit there's a new hop and a skip and a jump in the stride of the American people right now. It's going to be a great year ahead, 2025. We'll be right back, folks. I have some great guests lined up. We're going to have a lot of fun today as we prepare for New Year's Eve. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio, the number one talk radio station in these United States. My next guest on our New Year's Eve preview special is the great John Evans. And John Evans is the founding partner of a group called Promising People. And John, first of all, thanks for joining. And let's start this conversation by you telling us what Promising People is. What do you do, and why is it important?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Steve Moore. Delighted to be here. Here's the promise. Here's the problem, and here's my operating premise. And that is, we have, and I want to be very clear, I want to underscore that I absolutely love this country dearly, but we have a self-inflicted wound.
Mm-hmm.
And that self-inflicted wound, Steve, is this idea of recidivism. And what is recidivism? Of course, it's when somebody is released from prison and then they return back to prison because they were not able to get their life in order.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the staggering number, Steve Moore. It is at a 83% number. So 83% of the time when an inmate, a returning citizen, leaves prison, he or she is going to be back in prison within 9 years. And that is just preposterous, and it's morally reprehensible. So we're going to fix it at Promising People. And the way we're going to fix it, Steve, is with this miracle called virtual reality. Now, my father was an Ivy League educated history professor. He taught all around the world. And he would always talk about Gutenberg in 1440. And he would talk about the printing press and what a breakthrough it was. Well, we have something on that par with virtual reality. What do I mean by that? When you learn something through a virtual reality headset, you are going to retain 80% more of the content. And please I would love for your viewers to fact check that for me. But it is truly a miracle in education and training. And we're going to put that to use at Promising People. We're out of Orlando, Florida, and we're just now starting to rock and roll. And we're going to reduce this. We're going to cut the recidivism rate in half, Steve Moore.
Mm-hmm. So this is a national crisis. The fact that we're essentially, when we put people in prison, especially maybe a 19 or 20, 21-year-old, that we're just turning them into professional criminals. And it's just outrageous. And it's so sad that this is happening. I mean, I can't believe the recidivism rate is that high. I mean, that is such an indictment of our prison system that they're just basically releasing people back out and then soon they're right back in again. I mean, that's a failure. That's a complete failure of our prison system.
That's exactly right. Said differently, 95% of the millions of people that are incarcerated will be coming back to society, 83% of whom will be returning to prison. Now, let's really, I work a lot with the Navy SEALs, as you know. I'm not one, to be clear, but I work with them. I've studied them for a decade, and they talk about upstream disruption. Problem number one, illiteracy in prison is at an unacceptable 60 to 70%.
No, I can't. But hold on, 60% of people in prison can't read.
Cannot read, are functionally illiterate.
Secondly, sad.
By
the way, that is not just an indictment of our prison system. That's an incredible indictment of our education system as well, which we also need to fix.
That is exactly right. Secondly, the GED, while well-intentioned, has just anemic results. I mean, it's just breathtaking how bad the GED is for returning citizens. It's somewhere around a 2% success rate. We now have a solution at Promising People that is ensuring a 95% success rate for a high school diploma. And a high school diploma, Steve Moore, you'll appreciate as an economist, pays 33% more than a GED would. So the key is you're learning at your own pace, asynchronously, Steve, with the headset on. You're removing distractions. And here's the big one. You're removing shame from the didactic or the learning experience. Because a lot of these folks, God bless them, Steve, God bless them, they have horrific memories of high school and junior high and being giggled at, and they weren't students, right? And we dropped shop. When you and I went to high school and junior high, there was shop. And we, for these kinesthetic learners, for people that learn with their hands and doing, we just neglected them. We dropped them off. And so we're paying the price now with this incredible rate. So number two is we're going to get them a high school diploma. They're going to learn at their own pace. Number three, they're going to have 23 different curricula from which to choose in the trades, Steve Moore. And as you know, we need help there. Electrical helper, that's our flagship program. That's, by the way, I'm a DeSantis appointee, as you know. And Governor Ron DeSantis put himself through Yale and New Haven as an electrical helper. So we have the opportunity to educate and get these guys a gainful, and gals, a gainful job so they can have a sense of dignity. And I have to tell you one story. We're in Cibola, New Mexico, with the U.S. Marshals, Steve Moore. Now, the U.S. Marshals heretofore have never done any rehab with their detainees, with their inmates. Since inception by President George Washington, in the 1780s, there has been no rehab until now. We went out there recently. We sent out a team from Promising People, and we had 2 cohorts of 25 men apiece. And these are rough guys, Steve. These are rough men. They have been through it. And we're going to call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was learning to become an electrical helper through Promising People using the headset, where we compress the time. It normally takes 10 months to become an electrical helper. We moved that down to 15 days because of the incredible velocity of learning with virtual reality. And Mr. Smith was set to get out of prison, Steve. And he said, no, I'm not leaving prison because I haven't got my certificate yet, because I don't know how to make a clean living out there on the other side of these walls. Now, if that's not heart-wrenching, if that doesn't move your soul, I don't know what does. So we appealed to the warden, Steve. We appealed to the judge. Mr. Smith stayed. He got his certificate. He's now working as an electrical helper. Hallelujah. We're giving him a fishing pole. We're giving him a way to – now we're not giving him a fish. We're giving him a fishing pole, and we're going to show him how to use it, and he can get out in the marketplace. And one of the big problems – those are remarkable results. One of the big problems I have is that I think we just over-incarcerate people, especially young people, unless they are involved in a very dangerous, violent crime. I worry that when we put these, a 20-year-old in prison for 2 or 3 or 4 years, we're just dooming that young person, most of them young males, most of them young black males, to a life of criminality. And so isn't there some kind of alternative to incarceration? I believe, as you do, as we all do as Christians or Jews, that everyone in life needs a second chance. These young people, a 19-year-old, maybe grow up in a broken family. They went to crappy schools, everything, they had 2 strikes against them when they were born. I find it just almost inhumane that we don't give people a second chance. That's exactly right. A couple of scriptures just leap at me. There, but for the grace of God, go I, number 1. Mm-hmm. Also, Isaiah comes to mind. Look, I am doing a new thing. Don't you perceive it? And that's what we're going to do here, because with President Donald J. Trump, that man is nothing if not a problem solver, for heaven's sakes. I mean, he is born for this. And my boss, Ron DeSantis, has been fantastic down here in Florida to accelerate. We're going in, we're going to be behind the walls now here in Florida, getting this going. And that's exactly right. I mean, the case studies just abound. It's so wrenching. Alan Russell in 2021 in Mississippi got a life sentence without parole for possessing 1.05 ounces of marijuana.
What?
He's in jail forever.
I don't believe that.
Yeah, so you can Google it and look it up. Now, he had been arrested before, but never for anything violent.
That's just sick. Sick.
And it was 17 years since his last arrest, and now he's sitting and he's rotting in prison. Remember, 95%, Steve, are coming out, and 83% will be returning. And we've got to do something about that, Steve Moore.
So we have a crisis in our criminal justice system, clearly. By the way, how many of these folks that you're dealing with are involved in drugs, drug related crimes?
Right. Yeah, there's plenty of them. I don't have a statistic for you, but I can say that there are plenty of them. And what I would really encourage your listeners to do, because most of your listeners, they know somebody or at least know somebody who knows somebody that's incarcerated. I mean, again, we have millions of people that are on supervised release or are behind bars, and have them go to the warden or the person in charge and say, look, and I'm sorry for the shameless plug, but I think we're trying to change something here. PromisingPeople.com. Go to PromisingPeople.com and say, look, I want the headsets. I want access to the headsets. I want to learn. I want to get a certification.
Mm-hmm.
We have what is called a NOCTI certification, and Nancy OCTI. That is the gold standard in the trade, Steve. And that took us 2 years to get that, man.
Wow. So, John, we've only got about a minute and a half left. Tell us the quick story of your partner who really came up with this. It's a harrowing story, but everyone should hear it because it really could happen to any of us, and it's scary. But it has a bit of a happy ending. So go ahead and tell us what happened in that regard.
Yeah, that's great, and that's certainly germane to this whole story, Steve. And thanks. Dave Clark is my partner. He founded Promising People. He spent 6.5 years, 6.5 years in prison, largely in Coleman down here in Florida. I won't go into details because we don't have time, but I can tell you this, that Donald J. Trump commuted him on January 5th. How about that, the day before the
So wait a minute. Hold on. But back up a minute. You were saying, I remember when we had dinner with him, he was saying that he was there during COVID, and he went a full year without even seeing the sun, which I just thought.
He did not see the sun for 1 year. And
that's inhumane. That's cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, my God. I mean, how can you do that? How could he survive that?
The man is indefatigable, and he is on a mission. It's a calling for him. He's the most extraordinary person that I know.
Well, back up again. I just want to spend a couple extra minutes because this really is one of the most, it's a scary story. And it does have the happy ending, but he was, as I understand it, He was a real estate developer. I won't get into all the details, but then when the real estate market crashed, a bunch of he was accused of financial fraud. But what I found was amazing about that story was that he went before a jury. The jury found him not guilty, and the judge overruled the jury.
Correct. That can happen.
I've never even heard of that before. I've never heard of that before.
It's like Stalingrad in 1956. Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible that can happen in the USA.
And how did Trump even find out about this guy?
Through the Aleph Foundation, which is a Jewish organization that finds these awful, reprehensible scenarios of people that are incarcerated, and they work feverishly to overturn it. And Jared, the son-in-law of Donald Trump,
Jared Kushner,
pushed this to the fore. That's right. Thank you. Pushed this to the fore. Got to the president's attention. And Donald Trump
tell us when the call came in.
So the call comes in from Donald Trump to Crystal Clark, Dave's wife, loving, dutiful wife, who's waiting at home for 6.5 years. By the way, they indicted her. She spent 14 months behind, detained as well, because they're trying to get a plea bargain out of her. And she said, look, we've done nothing wrong. We're not doing it. I'm not doing any pleas. So Trump calls her and says, hi, this is Donald Trump. And she says, of course it is. And I'm Marilyn Monroe.
Right. Wow. But it was Donald Trump.
But it was Donald Trump. And listen, he got nothing out of this politically. This is the kind of man that, and he calls her. Then she realized, oh my gosh, it really is. And he says, I'm sending your boy home next Tuesday. This is the most preposterous case I've ever seen in my life.
Oh,
but that's 6.5 years, Steve. That's when he got the idea for Promising People. And then he reached out to a lot of incredible people. Dr. David Barker out of Iowa, who's amazing, a PhD economist from Chicago, your friend. Mm-hmm. The former chairman from Deloitte has been so valuable. Even Oprah Winfrey's right-hand person, Wintley Phipps, has been integral in our process here at
Well, John, we're up against a hard break, so we got to end this here. But it's an amazing story. Thank you for what you're doing with Promising People. It's a great story. Folks, we got to fix our prison system, our incarceration system. We got – how many people are behind bars today? It's in the millions, right?
Yeah, it's 2 million behind bars, and you have supervised release. You have millions more. So we've got some work to do. Yeah, Steve Moore.
Thanks, John. Have a happy New Year. That's John Evans of Promising People. Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas. I wanted to bring on next one of the top business minds in these United States, Bob Nardelli. Many of you who are regular listeners of the More Money Show know that I've had on Bob multiple times because he's got his finger on the pulse of what's happening with the labor market, with business conditions, and his resume. I could spend the rest of the hour talking about this man's accomplishments, but he was the CEO at one point of Home Depot. He was the CEO at one point of Chrysler, helped rebuild that company. He was number 2 or 3 in the chain of command under Jack Welch at GE during the golden age of General Electric. And by the way, you all know Bob from his multiple appearances on Fox News and Fox Business News. Bob Nardelli, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas, and thanks for joining.
Steve, thank you very much. You're always so kind, and it's always my pleasure to be on with you. And equally, your appearances. I don't know when you sleep, Steve. Every time I'm on TV, I see you.
Well, right back to you, my friend. So a lot to talk about. Let's talk about the good things to come. First of all, I mean, I'm very bullish on Trump. I think you share my bullishness on Trump's policies. I don't agree with all his policies, but I agree with the vast majority of them. Can a president? Let me put it like this, because you have the perspective of a CEO. Do you think the president can change the direction of a country economically?
Yeah. So, Steve, as you said, I've been very blessed to work with Fortune 500 CEOs, middle market, lower middle market families. And, a recent survey, and certainly my polling, is, the people that were pessimistic have moved more to the middle.
Yeah,
those that were like you, more optimistic, have become very optimistic. And again, you see it in so many, whether it's business forecast for 25, whether you talk about capital allocation, whether you talk about M&A, IPOs, there just seems to be an enthusiasm and an energy in our country that I haven't seen before. And, proof positive is when the president was over in Notre Dame and the world leaders were clustering.
Right, I remember.
Attention.
Yeah.
And you got Trudeau flying down overnight to talk with him. So I haven't seen that for a long time. And I just, what I love about President Trump is a promise made is a promise kept. And if he's able to get those through in the next 2 years, and I say 2 years because, we don't want to take the risk on the House. And so we got to get things done quickly and expeditiously with a level of, be very intentional about our strategy, Steve.
So you of all people understand that leadership counts, and we have a man who is a businessman who will be running our country from the presidency, not a career politician, which has been the case with so many of our modern presidents. And I just think that brings a different perspective about how things work.
Yeah, listen, there's no question the business acumen that he has developed over his career, and he's been in some really tough industries. You talk about construction and
real estate,
real estate, and, and what he's done. Not only nationally but internationally, in his understanding of economics, and certainly with your tutelage, you and Arts has been extremely helpful. I'm sure if I had the benefit of your knowledge and your coaching, I probably would have done a better job, Steve.
Well, by the way, let me just say something. First of all, thank you. That's a very complimentary thing to say. But I have to tell you, from the first time I met Donald Trump, and many of my regular listeners have heard me tell this story. But when Arthur Laffer and I went in, that was my first meeting was actually with Larry Kudlow and the president. And I have to tell you, Bob, I went into that room in January of 2016, having a negative opinion of Donald Trump. I just didn't like. I thought he was kind of full of it. I thought it was all self-promotion, and so we went in the room. We spent an hour and a half with him, just the three of us, by the way, just talking. And I came out, and I swear to God, Bob, this is a true story. Larry and I had our jaws open. we looked at each other, my God, that guy's going to be the next president of the United States. I mean, and the reason I bring that up is, we talked to him at length about the economy, and click, click, click. He just got it. He just understood everything we were talking about. So, when people say, oh, you guys are such great economic advisor, Trump, the truth is Trump doesn't need a lot of economic advice because he knows instinctively the right thing to do.
Yeah. Steve, I would say the oxygen there's oxygen back in the room now compared to where we've been the last 4 years. It's just been so draining, and I don't know where you start, but there's so many missteps and debacle decisions. It's just going to be so refreshing to have a business leader there who can, not only drive our economy, but has a level of globality to him that's going to be very impactful.
One thing I find fascinating, Bob, and I'm talking to Bob Nardelli, who's the great CEO of so many great companies in America. He served as number 2 or 3 in command at GE. He was the CEO of Home Depot. He was the CEO of Chrysler. And now you're a magnificent investor in companies as well. But Bob, can you explain to me, at first, when Trump ran for president in 2016 and throughout a lot of his, presidency in his first term, your colleagues who are CEOs of major companies were very skeptical of Trump. They were very tough on Trump, and a lot of them didn't like him very much and criticized him very much publicly. This time around, it's totally different. I mean, when you have the CEO of Facebook and Zuckerberg, and you've got Jeff Bezos and the people at Google all saying this guy's great, he's going to do the right thing. What happened? How is it these people went from being opponents to him to really seeing the light?
Isn't it amazing how quickly the reality of the Trump train has evolved, Steve? I mean, people that in some of the names you mentioned, I know and have had dinner at their homes, and you couldn't be more correct that these are individuals that have gone for 180. And when you look at the contribution, I mean, I don't think I've ever had a president, soon to be president, have kind of kickstart his library already with $15 million. That's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Right. Well, he's got a lot to do before he has his presidential library because we got 4 good years ahead.
I know, but to think of, I mean, usually that's something you do at the end of your term, not the beginning. But yeah, it's interesting, the $1 million contributions. But what's more interesting is not the amount, it's the people. And I hope that continues through his term, Steve, don't you? Because it's important that we all come together and come up with the best solution, whether it's on AI technology, certainly gaining our energy independence back. His comments to Europe now about LNG and being able to buy energy from us versus what's going on over there now, particularly with Germany. So I just think, you just go down the list of things that he's focused on, return to energy independence, right? Make sure that we close the border. And as Tom has said so many times, the new cabinet, the worst goes first. And I support that totally. Even if the tariffs that result in us being able to do that hurt us a little bit. Look, we've lived with 9.1% or more the last 4 years. And when I trade off safety and security for my children and my grandchildren, I'm willing to pay a little bit more if I have to in trade until we get this border closed, Steve, in my opinion.
So the next thing I wanted to ask you about, Bob Nardelli, is, we had something in our hotline the other day. And for folks who are not getting that, why aren't you getting it? It's free. Just go to unleashprosperity.com and get our daily email called The Hotline. And it summarizes what's going on very concisely in the economy and business and in politics. But we had a feature a few days ago about the fact that the United States of America and our great companies, many of which you have led, are just hitting it out of the park. One statistic I saw from Bloomberg, and I don't know if this is precisely true, but it's probably close to being true, is that 60% of all the equity, Bob, in all the companies in the world, 60% of those companies are domiciled here in the United States of America, we're just killing it. And obviously, 7 of the 8 top technology companies are here in America. And there's so many factors here about why that is. That, by the way, we are 5 or 6% of the population, and we have 60% of the wealth. That's pretty amazing accomplishment. Give me, as someone who's led some of these great companies, what do you think the factors are that have led to this greatness of America and our supremacy in technology and finance and banking and retail? I mean, you were in retail. So what makes America so special?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things, Steve, and it's a great question. If I can, just before that, you have financial advisors, and they say, well, you got to have, a good blend and offshore and emerging. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Why do I need to do that? Isn't Caterpillar quite a bit of offshore? Isn't Coca-Cola a lot of bit of offshore? So I don't need to invest. I don't need to put my money offshore. I just need to put my money in the these U.S.-based companies that have international stretch, and I'll be just happy there because I know them, I know their policies, I know their ethics, I know a lot more about them. So that's number one. But I think you ripped off 4 or 5 reasons why, because you either innovate or you evaporate in today's market, and speed of implementation is the biggest competitive advantage you have. And so we've got brilliant people, we've got great capital allocations, we thrive on innovation, and I just think that the more we do that, the better we will become. And under this president, I think he's going to be our biggest supporter and our biggest cheerleader to make sure companies that have kind of laid back over the last 4 years are going to spring into action, Steve. I believe that from the bottom of my heart.
So you were talking about innovation and investment, which brings me to the tax cut, because one of the things we tried to accomplish with some success in that Trump tax cut, which you and I want to make permanent, was we allowed businesses to immediately write off a lot of their R&D expenses when they bought capital equipment. So that incentivized them to do more of it. We also cut the tax rates in order to get, more innovation. And it seemed to have worked. Do you think tax policy plays a role?
Tremendous role. And one of the companies, that I participate in and advise is they were dormant on the R&D credits that you and Art put in place. And so I basically go around and encourage people to look at that and understand how you could, within the policies, by reporting and tracking, you can get tremendous advantage. The other thing that's critical on these tax cuts from the business standpoint, certainly the middle to lower middle market companies, these family-owned businesses, I just can't imagine losing the tax credits, the benefit that they have today, and seeing that increase. Steve, that will just, they're already struggling with some, supply chain inflation as a result of this last 4 years, but that would just be a heck of a damper on their viability going forward. So I can't encourage you and Art and certainly the president to push these things through. And I know Congress is trying this game of trying to not allow for raising the level of debt, which won't unless you get that, you're not going to be able to do these tax things. And all of us out here need to understand that little rope-a-dope trick that they're trying on you, Steve.
Yeah, it's a great point. Well, we got to make that tax cut permanent. One last question, Bob, and then I'll let you go. I'm talking to the great Bob Nardelli, one of America's great CEOs. I spoke a week or two ago at a big CEO summit that Yale puts on in New York City, and there must have been, 40 of the top 100 CEOs in that room. And it was a very illuminating experience for me. I was very honored to be there. I'm not a CEO, but one of the things that struck me in talking to a lot of these men and women who run great companies, and almost all of them were American companies, is so many of them were actually not born in the United States. They were immigrants, people who came here. I mean, I sat next to the CEO of Citibank, and she's British, and there was another gentleman sitting 2 seats to me to the right, and he was from Thailand. Another one was from India. And it just seems to me that immigration is part of this innovation process and our entrepreneurial spirit. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I do. And first of all, I read some glowing reports from Jeff, who puts that program on for Yale, about you and the participation in the CEOs there. So Thank you for being there. It's always
I didn't know you
have.
knew about it. It was a wonderful thing. I learned a lot from the CEOs, and I spoke for about 10 minutes, but it was great. But anyway, so what do you think?
Yeah. Well, remember, I'm one of your biggest followers now, so I keep track of you, you know?
It's an honor.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah. So here's what I think about that. And I've tried to run all these companies the same way. You know, when you talk about diversity, it's not only ethnicity and gender, it's diversity of thought. It's diversity of experience.
Yes.
And what you just articulated was that. And so, you know, I don't care where I can get the best ideas, where I can get the most influential leaders, people that can build a culture of how to versus why not, and whether they come from India or all the countries you named. I'm more than happy to put those on my team, and more importantly, Steve, put them on the field and put them in as the coach and let them play, because they bring tremendous vitality. They bring new ideas. They're not encumbered with the past. Toughest thing to change is what you put in place, and that's why sometimes it's better. You with me, Steve? To change the coach or the quarterback, because you get a refresh, if I can say it that way. And so that's what you've articulated, and I think that's why it works so well, Steve.
So, Bob, can I hold you on for just one or two more quick questions, Bob? I know I told you just okay, because by the way, my producers yell at me and say we got a break for commercial, but I got to ask you about this, and we're just going to hold back on the ads for a minute. So, one of the things you mentioned that we were talking about that meeting that I spoke in, and I'll tell you what I said to these CEOs, and I thought they might kick me out of the room for saying it, but I said I hate to tell you this, but a lot of you CEOs have been out of touch with middle-class Trump-type voters, the people who push Trump over the goal line, and I mentioned the thing like, the Bud Light commercial, which one I'm talking about, that cost, Budweiser $40 billion because they insulted their customers. And I said, look, you CEOs have to move away from the left, because this is not a center-left country. This is a center-right country, and pay attention to what's happening in America. Stop with the DEI and the all of the ESG stuff, and listen to what Americans are saying, because I think that's why Trump won. He understands these folks more than they do. And I can't tell you how many of these folks came up to me afterwards and said, Steve, you're right. We've been kind of wrong on this. And I just wonder if you have any observation about that.
I have. Let me share some practices. So, I always believed in market focus and customer centric. And when I was at Home Depot, I'd walk a couple hundred stores a year, because I wanted to make sure I got unfiltered feedback of what the customers were saying or doing in the store. When I was running Chrysler, I made it mandatory that our executive team would go over to the call center and listen to the complaints, because I wanted to make sure they were hearing what our actual customers were experiencing unfiltered, right? So we would listen in, and this problem, that problem. So they couldn't be quite as arrogant and condescending about how good they were when you got customer complaints, and therefore we had to be very sensitive and very responsive. And I think there's some companies out there, you mentioned one, there's another one that just maybe had a misstep, another car company had a misstep, but I think having that day-to-day interaction, and that's what this president does. He's shaking hands, he's out there, among us, and really reading customer centricity and trying to respond to it. So I think it's very, very important what you said, and I'm glad to hear those CEOs responded that way, Steve.
Well, I think you're spot on, sir. I mean, when we put out on our hotline and we get a lot of mail back, and my guys who work for me say, you don't have to read through all the comments. And I say, yes, I do. I want to know what people are saying. And we get, a lot of positive, but we get Steve, you were wrong on this, you're wrong on that. And it makes me think about, well, maybe I am wrong about this. I'm not always right. And so I think that's a really great point. You got to listen to your customers.
Yeah. It's like when you go outside in the winter with a lot of coats and sweaters, you really don't know the temperature till you start taking them off. And that's what it means being closer to the customer, Steve.
Amen. Well, Bob Nardelli, thank you. I could talk to you for another hour. I so much appreciate it. Could you come on again sometime in the near future, and we'll finish this conversation?
It'd be my honor. Steve. Thank you.
That's Bob Nardelli. This is the More Money Show on WABC, folks. We'll be right back.
Eden Memorial Chapels understands Jewish funerals can take many forms. Some are Orthodox, while others are more conservative or of a Reformed nature. There's no one better. With services close to all New York and New Jersey cemeteries, Eden Memorial Chapels offer fair and balanced pricing and can provide easy transfer of you and your loved ones to Israel. While you're grieving, they're here to take care of all the details so that you deal with less bureaucracy and have more peace of mind. Go to EdenMemorial.com. That's EdenMemorial.com.